In the small mountain town of Cold Creek, people didn't really see Ethan Walker. They noticed him, sure, but only the way you notice a cracked sidewalk or a broken fence. Something you step around, something that's just there. Ethan was 12 years old, skinny in a way that came from too many skipped meals and too many long winters. His jacket was always one size too big, a hand-me-down from someone who didn't need it anymore, and the sleeves hung past his fingers like he was wearing someone else's life. His dark hair was always a little messy, not because he didn't care, but because caring took time, and time was something he never had much of. Every morning, before the sun climbed over the pine-covered hills, Ethan walked into town with a battered backpack slung over his shoulder. Sometimes he collected scrap metal, sometimes empty bottles. Sometimes things people threw away that were still useful if you knew how to look at them. He had eyes like that, sharp, observant, always scanning the world for what others missed. People whispered when they saw him. "That's the mine kid." "Yeah, the one who lives underground." "Poor thing, won't last one winter." Ethan pretended not to hear, but of course he did. He always did. What they didn't see was what waited for him at the end of the narrow dirt trail that led away from Cold Creek, past the rusted railroad tracks and into the rocky hills. There, hidden behind a wall of crooked boulders and tall, stubborn weeds, was the old silver mine everyone had abandoned years ago. To the town, it was dangerous. To Ethan, it was home. Inside that mine, it didn't feel like a dark hole in the earth. It felt safe. The air was cool but steady. The thick stone walls kept the worst of the mountain wind away. And down one long tunnel, warm light flickered. "Ethan," a small voice called. "I'm here, Lil," he answered as he stepped inside. Lily Walker, his 8-year-old sister, was sitting on a blanket near a little cooking stove made from old metal parts Ethan had welded together himself. Her blonde hair was tied into 2 messy pigtails, and her cheeks were smudged with dirt. But her smile was bright. Always bright. "You took forever," she said. "Found some good stuff today," Ethan replied, setting down his pack and pulling out a bent lantern, a bundle of wires, and a half-broken solar panel. "This one might still work." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yeah, it might need some fixing, but I think I can make it give us more light at night." Lily scooted closer. "You always make things work." Ethan smiled a little at that. Not a big smile, just a quiet, steady one. The kind that didn't need attention. They had been living in the mine since last spring, after their small trailer burned down and no one stepped forward to take them in. Some folks brought food, some offered pity, but nobody offered a place to stay. So Ethan had brought Lily here instead. He had cleaned out one of the larger chambers, built a wooden floor to keep the damp away, and even rigged a ventilation system using old pipes and a cracked fan. It wasn't pretty, but it was clever, and it worked. Still, to Cold Creek, they were just 2 poor kids hiding underground. That afternoon, Ethan walked back into town to check the weatherboard outside the general store. A red notice was pinned there, flapping in the wind. "Severe winter warning. Coldest temperatures in decades expected." People gathered around it, their faces tense. "Looks like we're in for it," one man muttered. "Better stock up," another said. "My roof barely made it last year." Ethan read every word. Then he looked up at the sky, gray, heavy, and threatening. Something twisted in his chest. Back at the mine, he spread out his notes on a wooden crate. Hand-drawn diagrams, numbers, little sketches of airflow, water drainage, heat paths. Things no one expected a 12-year-old to understand. Lily watched him quietly. "Is it going to be bad?" "Yeah," he said, "worse than usual." She hugged her knees. "Are we going to be okay?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He studied the rock walls, the ceiling, the narrow entrance where sunlight slipped in during the day. "We will be," he finally said, "if we get ready." While Cold Creek trusted their wooden homes and old chimneys, Ethan trusted something else. The mountain. And deep down, though no one else believed in him, Ethan Walker was already preparing for a winter that would change everything. The day after the winter warning went up in Cold Creek, the town felt different. The air carried a tense, uneasy stillness, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. People hurried through the streets with armfuls of firewood and canned food. Pickup trucks rumbled past, stacked high with supplies. Everyone was getting ready in their own way. Everyone except Ethan. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he was already thinking 10 steps ahead. Back inside the mine, Ethan stood in the main chamber with his hands on his hips, studying the stone walls and ceiling like an architect inspecting a half-finished house. The light from the small solar lamp he'd fixed the night before cast warm shadows across the rock, revealing every crack, every curve. "This place is stronger than any house in town," he murmured. Lily sat on the edge of their cot, hugging her favorite stuffed rabbit. "It's still a cave," she said softly. "Yeah," Ethan replied, "but caves don't get blown over by the wind. They don't crack when the cold hits. The mountain doesn't care how bad the storm is. It just stays." He knelt beside one of the metal crates and opened it, pulling out coils of wire, an old car battery, and a bundle of pipes. His movements were confident, deliberate, not rushed, not careless. The kind of focused energy that came from a boy who had learned, the hard way, that preparation was the only thing standing between safety and disaster. Over the next few days, Ethan worked like someone twice his age. He built a thicker door for the mine entrance, layering plywood, scrap metal, and insulation he'd salvaged from abandoned buildings. He sealed every gap with foam and cloth, making sure no icy wind could sneak through. Inside, he expanded their ventilation system, adding another duct that led deeper into the rock. He adjusted the angle carefully so warm air from their stove would circulate instead of escaping. "Feels warmer already," Lily said one evening, rubbing her hands together. "That's the idea," Ethan said. "The stone holds heat. Once it's warm, it stays warm." He also rigged a simple water system using melted snow and gravity-fed tubing, filling old barrels so they'd never run out. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could cost them later. But the more he built, the more people in town started to notice. One afternoon, Ethan was hauling a sheet of corrugated metal through Cold Creek when a group of adults near the hardware store laughed. "Hey, mine kid," one of them called. "Building a castle underground?" Ethan didn't stop walking. Another voice chimed in. "What are you going to do when that whole mountain caves in on you?" More laughter followed, loud and careless. Ethan felt his face heat up, but he kept his eyes forward. He had heard it all before. Later that day, the general store owner, Mr. Harris, shook his head when Ethan asked for more insulation. "You know, son," he said, "people survive just fine in houses. That cave of yours, it's not meant for living." Ethan met his gaze. "Neither was our trailer, but we lived there." Mr. Harris didn't have an answer for that. Back in the mine, Lily sat close to Ethan as he hammered another support beam into place. "Do you think they're right?" she asked quietly. "What if this isn't safe?" Ethan paused, resting his forehead against the cool wood. He was tired, bone-deep tired, but he didn't let it show. "I don't know everything," he admitted, "but I know this. Out there in those houses, they're fighting the cold. In here, we're working with the mountain. That's different." Lily nodded slowly. That night, Ethan barely slept. He kept getting up to check the temperature, to listen to the wind outside, to make sure nothing had shifted or cracked. The mine was silent, solid, dependable, but doubt still crept in. What if he was wrong? The next morning, the first snowflakes fell. Small, gentle, almost harmless. But Ethan knew better. He tightened the last bolt on their door and glanced at Lily. "We're not crazy," he said, more to himself than to her. "We're just ready." Outside, Cold Creek kept laughing. Inside the mountain, a 12-year-old boy was building something that might soon be the only thing standing between life and death. By the time the first real storm clouds rolled over Cold Creek, even the people who had laughed the loudest were starting to feel uneasy. The sky stayed gray for days. Not the soft gray of passing weather, but a heavy, brooding gray that pressed down on the mountains like a warning. The wind grew sharper. The air felt brittle, like it might crack. Ethan noticed all of it. Every morning, he stepped outside the mine and studied the clouds. The way the trees swayed, the way the river at the bottom of the valley ran faster and darker than usual. He didn't have a weather app or fancy instruments. He had something better: careful eyes and a restless, calculating mind. "It's going to hit soon," he told Lily one evening. "How soon?" she asked, sitting close to the little stove. "Soon enough that we need to be ready for the worst." He wasn't trying to scare her, but he wasn't going to lie either. Over the next few days, Ethan pushed himself harder than ever. He hauled in more wood. He filled every barrel they owned with water. He even started building a second small stove out of an old metal drum, just in case the first one failed. "You don't think it'll break, do you?" Lily asked, watching him tighten bolts with a wrench. "No," he said, "but I think about what happens if it does." That was the difference between Ethan and most adults in Cold Creek. They planned for what they expected. He planned for what they didn't. Meanwhile, the town was buzzing with activity. Trucks lined the streets. People nailed boards over windows. Chimneys were checked and rechecked. Everyone was busy, but not always smart about it. One afternoon, Ethan walked past a group of men arguing about whose generator was better. Mine can run for days, one boasted. Yeah, if the fuel doesn't freeze, another shot back. Ethan stopped for a moment. Fuel thickens in extreme cold, he said quietly. If it drops far enough, it won't flow right. They stared at him. Then someone laughed. Listen to the mine kid giving us a science lesson. Ethan walked away. Back inside the cave, he added extra insulation around their water barrels. He wrapped pipes in cloth and tape. He even built small raised beds near the entrance of the mine, where sunlight still slipped in. Why are you planting stuff now? Lily asked, puzzled. Because plants don't like sudden changes, Ethan said, and neither do we. The soil was dark and rich from years of mineral runoff. He mixed in compost he'd saved, pressing tiny seeds into the earth with careful hands. If the cold doesn't get them, he said, they'll grow. And if they grow, we'll have fresh food. That night, the wind began to howl. It wasn't loud at first, just a distant moan in the mountains. But as the hours passed, it grew deeper, angrier. Snow started falling, thick and fast, swirling in wild patterns that swallowed the trail leading back to town. Lily crawled closer to Ethan on their cot. It sounds scary. It is, he admitted, but we're okay. Still, even he felt a flicker of fear. He'd prepared as best he could, but nothing ever went exactly as planned. Outside, Cold Creek was slowly being buried. Roofs creaked, windows rattled, chimneys struggled to draw smoke through the thick, frozen air. Families huddled around fires, watching their breath fog in their living rooms. Inside the mine, it was quiet. The stone walls absorbed the heat from Ethan's stove, radiating it back into the chamber. The air stayed steady. The temperature barely shifted. Lily held her hands out toward the warmth. It's kind of cozy. Ethan nodded. That's the mountain working. Hours passed. The storm grew worse. Snow piled higher and higher, cutting off roads, snapping power lines, isolating the town. Ethan didn't sleep. He checked everything twice, then 3 times. And when he finally sat down beside Lily, listening to the wind rage outside, he realized something with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Cold Creek had no idea how bad this winter was going to be, but he did. And the storm was only just beginning. The storm didn't fade. It didn't slow. It didn't give Cold Creek a single moment to catch its breath. By the 3rd day, the snow was piled higher than car hoods, and the wind had become something alive, howling, slamming, ripping through the town like it was trying to tear every weak thing apart. Trees cracked under the weight of ice. Power lines snapped and disappeared beneath the drifts. The world outside turned into a white, roaring blur. Inside the mine, Ethan and Lily sat wrapped in blankets, listening. Is it ever going to stop? Lily whispered. Not yet, Ethan said. He was calm, but not careless. Every few hours he checked the door, brushing away the snow that built up against it. He checked the stove, the vents, the water barrels. Everything was holding. Outside, nothing was. That night, Ethan heard something different through the storm, something that didn't belong to the wind. A shout. He froze, straining to listen. There it was again, faint, desperate. Help, please! Ethan grabbed his coat. Stay here, he told Lily. Ethan, I'll be right back. He pushed the heavy door open, fighting against the blast of freezing air. Snow stung his face as he stepped outside, following the sound through the swirling white. Near the trail, a man was down on his knees, clutching a woman and a small boy. Their faces were pale, their clothes stiff with frost. Please, the man gasped. Our chimney collapsed. The house filled with smoke. We barely got out. Ethan recognized him, Mr. Collins, one of the men who had laughed at him. Come with me, Ethan said, not hesitating. He led them back to the mine, forcing the door shut behind them. The warmth hit them like a wave. Oh my God, the woman whispered. It's warm. Lily hurried over with blankets. Sit, you're safe. Mr. Collins looked around in disbelief. You live here? Yes, Ethan said simply. They weren't the last. By morning, more people came. A family whose roof had caved in, an elderly couple who had run out of firewood, a mother with 2 shivering kids who hadn't eaten in a day. Ethan didn't turn anyone away. The mine filled with voices, with coughing, with the soft sobs of people who had come too close to losing everything. Lily worked beside him, handing out water, helping children sit near the stove. Ethan, she whispered, What if there's not enough? There has to be, he said. We'll make it enough. Outside, Cold Creek was breaking. Inside the mountain, something new was being born. A refuge. A place where a 12-year-old boy became something no one had ever expected. A leader. And the storm was still raging. By the fifth day of the storm, Cold Creek didn't feel like a town anymore. It felt like a battlefield. The snow outside the mine had risen so high that the entrance looked like it was sinking into the mountain. The wind never stopped screaming. It tore through broken homes and abandoned streets, dragging pieces of people's lives with it. Shingles, doors, shattered signs. Inside the mine, more than a dozen people huddled together in the warm, stone-lit chamber. And somehow, they were still alive. Ethan stood near the stove, studying the room the way a general might study a map. Families lay wrapped in blankets. Children dozed against their parents' shoulders. A few men were quietly adding wood to the fire, following the system Ethan had laid out. No one had argued with him. Not anymore. At first, they'd been skeptical. Taking instructions from a 12-year-old felt strange, almost embarrassing. But after one night in the mine, after feeling the steady warmth while the storm tried to kill them outside, something shifted. This kid knew what he was doing. Ethan, Mr. Collins said quietly, approaching him. We're running low on drinking water. Ethan nodded. There's more snow outside. I'll send 2 people with me. We'll melt it in the back chamber. I'll go, another man offered immediately. So did a second. Ethan gave them quick, precise instructions. Where to walk, how to avoid weak spots, how to keep the door sealed behind them. People listened. Lily stood near a group of kids handing out pieces of bread. She tried to smile, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. Later, when things were quieter, she pulled him aside. I'm scared, she whispered. There's so many people. I know, Ethan said softly, but they need us. What if we mess up? Ethan took a slow breath. Then we fix it, just like we always do. That was the thing about Ethan Walker. He didn't believe in perfect. He believed in trying again. That night, the temperature dropped even further. Ice formed on the outer walls of the mine. Frost crept along the metal door. But inside, the stone glowed with stored heat. The air stayed breathable. The water barrels didn't freeze. People began to look at Ethan differently. Not as the mine kid, but as the reason they were still breathing. A woman named Mrs. Carter, who had lost her home in the storm, sat beside him. You saved us, she said, her voice shaking. All of us. Ethan shook his head. The mountain did, but you knew how to use it. That was something no one could deny. As the storm kept hammering Cold Creek, more people arrived. Some limped, some cried, some just stared hollow-eyed. Ethan made space for them all. He organized sleeping shifts, fire shifts, watch shifts. He even assigned kids simple tasks so they wouldn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was order, built by a boy who had once been invisible. And now, in the heart of winter's fury, Ethan Walker was the only reason Cold Creek still had hope. After a while, the storm stopped feeling like something that would ever end. Outside the mine, Cold Creek had vanished beneath layers of snow and ice. Houses were buried. Roads were gone. Even the tall pine trees that once lined the valley now bent under heavy white blankets, frozen in place like ghosts of the living world. Inside the mountain, life continued. Not easily, not comfortably, but steadily. Ethan turned the cave into something more than a shelter. He turned it into a system. He gathered everyone together in the main chamber one morning, his voice calm but firm. We need rules, he said, not to control anyone, just to keep us all alive. People nodded. Fire watch runs all night. 2 people at a time, he continued. We rotate every 2 hours. If the fire dies, we all freeze. A man raised his hand. What about food? Ethan pointed toward the raised beds near the entrance of the mine. We've got greens growing. Not much, but it helps. We ration everything else, no hoarding. No one argued. Lily helped organize the kids. She taught them how to gather kindling, how to bring water, how to stay quiet during resting hours. You're like a teacher, one little girl said. Lily smiled faintly. My brother taught me. The air inside the mine carried a mix of warmth and tension. People were tired, hungry, scared, but they were alive, and that mattered. Ethan barely slept. Every strange sound pulled him to his feet. A shifting rock, a sputtering flame, a coughing child. One night, when the wind outside howled like something dying, he found Mr. Collins staring at the stone wall. You really think this mountain will hold? The man asked. It's held for thousands of years, Ethan said. We just have to respect it. That was the heart of it. He wasn't fighting the storm. He was letting the mountain fight it for them. Days blurred together. Snow continued to fall. Wolves were heard howling in the distance, but the system worked. The air stayed clean. The fire stayed lit. The water kept flowing. The small plants near the entrance kept growing, slow but stubborn, pushing green leaves toward what little sunlight they could find. They were living off something bigger than themselves. One evening, Lily brought Ethan a small bowl of soup. "You haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry," he said. She looked at him. "You're always not hungry." Ethan sighed and took the bowl. "Okay, a little hungry." She smiled. Around them, people whispered about him. "That kid saved us. He built all this." "I don't know how he did it." Ethan didn't hear most of it. He was too busy making sure no one died. And in a winter that was supposed to destroy them all, a boy who once had nothing had built something stronger than fear. The storm raged on, but so did they. The storm didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like a tired monster finally running out of strength. One morning, after weeks of endless wind and snow, Ethan opened the heavy mine door and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Silence. No howling, no screaming wind. Just the soft, fragile quiet of a world that had survived. Sunlight spilled across the snow outside, blinding and beautiful. The town of Cold Creek lay buried, broken, but still there. People stepped out behind him, shielding their eyes, some of them crying when they realized they were still alive. "We made it," someone whispered. Ethan stood quietly at the entrance, his breath fogging the cold air. He didn't feel like cheering. He felt tired. The kind of deep emotional tiredness that comes after carrying too much responsibility for too long. Lily slipped her hand into his. "You did it," she said. "We did," he corrected softly. Over the next few days, the people who had taken shelter in the mines slowly returned to what was left of their homes. Some cabins were repairable, others were gone forever, but no one had forgotten where they'd survived. The mine was no longer the mine kids' hideout. It was the place that saved Cold Creek. Mr. Collins came back with tools and lumber. Mrs. Carter brought food. Others came with blankets, batteries, even a new door. They didn't call Ethan Mine Kid anymore. They called him the boy who kept us alive. One afternoon, a reporter from a nearby town arrived, trudging through the melting snow. "Is it true," she asked, "that a 12-year-old built the shelter that saved this whole valley?" Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero in his own mind. He was just a kid who didn't want his sister to freeze. That night, as the fire crackled inside the mine and the mountain held them one more time, Lily leaned against him. "Do you think they'll ever laugh at us again?" Ethan looked at the strong stone walls, at the glowing embers, at the people who now trusted him with their lives. "No," he said, "they won't. Because sometimes the smallest, quietest people turn out to be the strongest." And now here's the real question for you. If you were in Cold Creek, would you have laughed at Ethan too? Or would you have believed in him when no one else did? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, powerful stories about courage, survival, and the hidden heroes among us. Your support helps keep these stories alive.